Welcome everybody to tonight's reading of PJ Chapter Book Time. We are enjoying the book How to Eat Fried Worms by Thomas Rockwell. And our friend Billy has now eaten his first 2 worms, albeit with lots of ketchup and mustard and horseradish. But he managed to do it. And the first worm at least was a nightcrawler. I don't know if you've ever seen a nightcrawler, but that is one big worm. But he managed to do it, and actually now Alan, who made the bet with him about eating the 15 worms, is getting a little nervous because he bet him $50, and certainly with the idea in his mind that Billy would never be able to do it. And now he's thinking, yikes, he might just make this all work. So let's find out what's going to happen in tonight's chapters. I've got my pals here. Are you guys all ready? All right, get comfortable. Chapter 7, Red Crash Helmets and White Jumpsuits. Well, that sounds like quite an outfit. After the movies, Tom walked home with Billy. Tomorrow, I'll roll the crawler around in cornmeal and fry it like a trout. You know, it's not really the taste, said Billy. It's more the thought. When I start to eat it, even though it's smothered in ketchup and mustard and grated cheese, I can't stop thinking worm. Worm, 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 worm. Gaggles of worm in bait boxes, drowned worms drying up on sidewalks, a worm squirming as the fishhook gores into him, the soggy end of a worm dangling out of a dead fish's mouth. Yikes. Robins yanking worms out of the lawn. I can't stop thinking worm. Yeah, but if I fry it in cornmeal, it won't look like a crawler, said Tom. I'll put parsley around it and some slices of lemon, and then you can concentrate. then you can concentrate and think fish. All the time you're waiting in the barn, all the time you're eating it, keep saying to yourself, fish, 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 fish. Here I am eating fish, good fish. Trout and salmon, flounder, perch. I'll ride my mini bike into church. Dace and tuna, haddock and trout, wait till you hear the minister shout. Excuse me. Fish, 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 fish. Shark and haddock, sucker and eel. I'll race my father in his automobile. Eel and flounder, bluegill and shark. We'll race all day till after dark. And Billy cheered up. Think how they'd all stare. I'd rev up the aisle, zip around the front pews, down a side aisle, under the stained glass windows. My parents would kill me. Reverend Yardard peered down over the Bible stand. William, he'd cry, William, you take that engine thing out of here this minute. Yeah, and then they'd come chasing out after us, said Tom. Billy laughed, waving their arms and yelling, and we'd lead them zigzagging round and round and in and out among the gravestones and monuments in the cemetery. Sorry, pardon me. And then roar off down the Sandgate Road, leaving them draped over tombs, panting and shaking their fists. Hup, hup, yelled Tom, dancing around and boxing the air. And that Monday we'd smuggle it into class, disguised as Raymond Dwelly, because he's so fat, and hide it in the coat closet. And then when Millie Butler said anything at all, even something like, excuse me, or even if she even sniffed, we'd dump a whole bottle of ink over her head and run for the coat closet, overturning chairs and desks behind us to slow up Mrs. Howard. She'd come after us, fuming and shouting threats, and suddenly the doors of the coat closet would slam open, and out we'd roar on our mini bike, in blood-red crash helmets and white jumpsuits, our scarves screaming out behind us. Wow, he has quite an imagination. And we'd roar around and around the classroom while Mrs. Howard knelt among the overturned desks and chairs, sobbing helplessly into her hands. And then room, room out the door and back up the hall, thumping our noses at the monitors. Brackety, brackety, brack, brack, brack up the stairs, stiff-arming tacklers into Mr. Simmons' office, and up onto his desk. Broom, broom, a backfire into his face, and zoom out the window as he topples backwards in his chair and a hurricane of quiz papers and report cards. And then, crunch, landing on the driveway, we tore off down the highway to Bennington and joined the Navy so Mrs. Howard and Mr. Simmons and our parents can't punish us. Whoa. Chapter 8, The Third Worm. Let's see how it works out when he fries it. Tom ran out of the kitchen of Billy's house holding the sizzling frying pan out in front of him with both hands, the screen door banging behind him. Alan threw open the barn door when he saw him coming, and Tom thumped the frying pan down on the orange crate. There, he said breathlessly. Whew, done to a T. Look at her, all golden brown and sizzling. It looks good enough to eat. Yeah, said Billy, and he poked the worm with his fork. Tom took off the potholder glove he was wearing. Think fish, he said. Remember, think fish. Trout, salmon, flounder, perch. I'll ride my mini bike into church. Eel and salmon, bluegill, trout. Wait till you hear the minister shout. Clam and flounder, tuna, sucker. Look out, here we come, old Mrs. Tucker. Lobster, black bass, oyster stew. There goes New Orleans, here comes Peru. He leaned over Billy and whispered in his ear, fish, 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 fish. Come on, take a bite. Fish, 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 fish. Okay, second bite. Fish, 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 fish. Wonder how that worked. I bet he got it down. Chapter 9, The Plotters. Geez, you think it'll work? Said Alan to Joe. Suppose it doesn't. He didn't seem to pay much attention today. Oh, don't worry, said Joe. We got him thinking. It takes time. I got it all doped out. Trust me. Billy was steadily grimacing, rubbing his nose, spreading on more horseradish sauce. Tom bent over him, hissing in his ear, fish, 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 fish. Billy paused. I wonder what Joe and, Alan had got planned. The Plotters means someone's cooking up a plan. Let's find out. Billy paused, watching Alan and Joe whispering by the door. He switched the last bite around and around in the ketchup and mustard, and all of a sudden he said, That's not fair. They can't act like that anymore. Every time I swallow, they lean forward as if they expected me to keel over or something. And then when I don't, they look surprised and shrug their shoulders and nudge each other. Come on, said Joe, cut it out. We can watch you for cripe's sake. We're just standing over here by the window watching you. Oh, no, you're not, said Billy. You're whispering and acting as if you expected something to happen every time I swallow. Oh, it's nothing, said Joe. Forget it. Look, we'll turn around and look out the window while you swallow. What do you mean it's nothing, said Billy. What's nothing? Oh, come on, said Alan. It's just something Joe's father told him the other night. It's nothing. What? What? Oh, it'll just worry you, said Alan. It's crazy. It's nothing. Forget it. Billy tore the napkin away from his throat. Tell me. It's nothing, said Joe. You know how my father is. He's always yelling about something. Tell me, or it's all off. Well, look, it's nothing, but the night before last I was telling Janie about you eating the worms, and my father was on the porch and heard us. So he threw down his newspaper and said, Joseph! So I says, yeah, Pa? And he says, have you had a worm, Joseph? And then he grabbed my shoulders and shook me till my hands danced at the end of my arms like a puppet's. It's for your own good, he says. So I started out, it's not going to do me any good. I'll shake to pieces. If I'm shake to pieces, is it? Janie was wailing, and my mother was chewing her apron in the doorway. Alfred, she cries, what has he done? You'll deracinate him. Has he hauled down the American flag at school and eaten it again? Has he? So what's the point? Yelled Billy. Get to the point. What's it all have to do with me? I'm coming to it, said Joe, wiping his nose. But I wanted to show you how important it was. My father nearly killed me and all. He sneezed. Achoo! And then Alan began to sneeze and finally had to hobble off to one of the horse stalls, hugging his stomach to recover. Anyway, said Joe, wiping his nose again and hitching up his Levi's, so my father told my mother he thought I had eaten a worm. A what? Says my mother, dropping her apron and clutching the sides of her head. A worm, said my father, nodding solemnly. So my mother fainted, collapsed all helter-skelter, right there in the doorway and lay still, her tongue lolling out of her mouth, her red hair spread out beautifully over the doorsill. Will you cut it out? Billy yelled. Who cares about your mother? What does it have to do with me? I think he's lying, said Tom. Excuse me. Who ever heard of someone's mother fainting and her tongue hanging out? All right, yelled Joe apoplectically. Ooh, that's a big word. Stamping out, all right. Now I won't tell. You can die. Billy Forrester. And you'll have to carry him home, Tom grout. All by yourself. Nobody says to me, who cares about your mother? All right, I'm going, Alan, he yelled. They're insulting my mother. I'm going. Don't, said Alan, running out of the horse stall and grabbing Joe by the shirt tail. Don't. You gotta tell him. Even your mother'd say so. Mine, too. No matter what he said. Ain't it a matter of life and death? I won't, said Joe, starting toward the door. Alan pulled him back. You got to. How long have we known poor Billy? 6, 7 years? For old time's sake, Joe, because we were all once in kindergarten together. Think of the agony he'll face, Joe. The pain and the blood and the gore. Billy was on his knees by the orange crate, wringing his hands, not daring to interfere. But when Joe glanced sullenly back at him, he whispered, Please, Joe, for old time's sake. Well, will you apologize for insulting my mother? I do, said Billy. I do apologize. And there he is on his hands and knees begging for forgiveness. I'm sorry, I said mean things about your mom. So Alan and Joe began to sneeze again, and this time had to bend over and put their heads between their legs to recover. Tom, who had been watching them suspiciously, trying to make out what was going on, started to say something. Shut up, hissed Billy, fiercely turning on him. You keep out of it. So Joe went on with his story, how his mother had been carried upstairs to her room, how the doctor had come, shaking his head, how his aunt had sobbed, pulling down all the shades in their house, and how that morning his mother had finally come downstairs for the first time, leaning on his aunt's arm, pale and sorrowful. How, yeah, said Tom, sure, why, sure, so why? What does eating worms do to you? Nobody will tell me, said Joe, spreading open his eyes wide. It's been 3 days now, and nobody'll say. It's just like the time my cousin Lucy got caught in the back seat of her father's Chevrolet with the encyclopedia salesman. Nobody told me why there was such an uproar. He wiped his mouth. But one thing's for sure, it's worse than poison, probably. Crap, said Tom. Oh, yeah, said Joe. By then, he and Alan had another sneezing fit, sprawling helplessly against each other. Look at them, said Tom to Billy. They're not sneezing, they're laughing. Come on, eat the last piece and let's get out of here. You really think so? Said Billy doubtfully. The sneezing did look an awful lot like giggling. Sure, look at them. Tom gave Alan and Joe a shove. They collapsed into a heap, sneezing uncontrollably. Billy watched them. Yeah, sure, they weren't sneezing, they were laughing, weren't they? Hay fever, gasped Alan. Hay fever. Ah, you never had hay fever before, said Tom. How about yesterday or the day before? Come on, Billy, open up. So Billy, half believing Tom and half not, glancing doubtfully at Alan and Joe, allowed Tom to poke the last bite of worm into his mouth and led him out of the barn. Alan and Joe sat up. didn't work, said Alan. Joe began to brush the chaff out of his hair. You wait. He wasn't sure, Tom was, but he isn't eating the worms. You wait. Billy's worried. He was before, and that's why he said he felt like he was going to throw up. But now he's really worried. Suppose I wasn't lying. Did you see his face when I said my father shook me? I thought his eyes would bug right out of his head. Alan laughed. Oh, geez, yeah. And when you said your mother fainted? Joe stopped brushing the chaff out of his hair. Except, why'd you laugh so much? If you'd kept a straight face, even Tom wouldn't have guessed. Ah, you laughed first. What do you mean? Me? I laughed first? I did not. You did so. You laughed when he yelled at you the first time. You wiped your nose, and off they went through the meadow, arguing. All right. So what do you think? You think eating the worms is going to really hurt Billy? I kind of don't think so. I think they're just trying to trick him into giving up so that they don't have to give him the $50. But he's now eaten 4 worms, and he started with 15, so you know what that means. 11 more to go. That's a lot of worms. Well, let's find out what happens tomorrow night. All right, have a good night, everybody. Good night.